sorting through our data it's a giant undertaking, but our goal today is that you're able to take just a few small obtainable goals and feel like your journey with your data collection feels a little bit more zen, which is our goal here today. So we have 3 declutter tips for you. And our first declutter tip is stick to the process. Follow a structured organizational process to keep your planning organized. If we're thinking about cleaning out our pantry or our refrigerator, we spend hours going through and pulling everything out, and we're scrubbing it down, and then we just put everything back in, only to find that we need to do the exact same process 2 months later, or if you're like me, like a year later. And that's indicative of the fact that we didn't have a strong process, a strong organizational structure to help us stay organized throughout that year. So as we're pulling more data sources out, we're trying to build our intervention plans. It's important that we stick to that process and we have a really clear organizational structure to keep your planning organized. So Lisa is going to talk a little bit more about the process that Branching Minds uses for a lot of our problem solving.
Thank you, Christina. So here is our decision-making process. Many of you may use Marie Kondo's methods for tidying up. Well, I read a little bit about her and her journey, and she actually read a best-selling book called The Art of Discarding and other books on the topic. And she thought that tidying meant just discarding, getting rid of things. She then heard a voice telling her to look at the items carefully and closely. And then Marie came to the realization that instead of looking for a reason to get rid of items, she should look for a reason to keep them. This cycle is how we are going to look closely and analyze our data to think about their purpose and how we might use these different data sources. And it's key to organizing data like Marie Kondo. So that is data tip number 1. And we're going to go ahead and get into declutter tip number 2. That is where our cycle here is going to come back. So first we want to think, what data am I trying to collect in order to identify and then analyze the problem? So what creates the clutter is casting too wide of a net for data collection without a clear plan. Or we're trying to address too many needs in one intervention. So how are we going to solve this? We're going to use our existing universal screening data, then strategically identify which diagnostic data you need in order to move forward with the creation of a plan. And we're keeping our eye on the prize. Our eye on the prize is on that SMART goal, and that's how we start creating that plan.
So the important thing to do before you kind of embark on collecting that diagnostic data is to choose your strategy first. Too often we think that the answer is just to collect as much data as we can and then draw the conclusions from there. But in reality, we are also strapped for time, for resources, and we don't have the capacity to kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So in Branching Minds, we really emphasize being strategic in our intervention analysis and planning. So you do your universal screener, and then you identify, oh, we have students that are in need of additional support. Before we just launch into trying all kinds of different diagnostic assessments, we're encouraging you to pause and slow down. We're trying to work smarter, not harder. When we're looking at students and we're trying to identify, where do I move forward? What data do I want to collect? We can follow our ISO model. So we start with our instruction. This is really our teacher toolkit. This is where we're looking at, did I differentiate my instructional strategies? Did I try different differentiation strategies? What exists within my instruction, which is in my control, to try or that may be impacting why this student has demonstrated this need. Once we've looked at our instruction, we look at the curriculum. Is the content accessible to the student? We're looking at our scope and sequence, the pacing of the curriculum. Are we sure that the curriculum is following a linear model where students are gaining the prerequisite skills along the way? And then is this content relevant to our student? Then third, we're going to look at our environment. What is in the setting? How is this setting for instruction potentially hindering the student's learning? So are there potential distractions at play? We look at things like our seating charts, our block schedule. If we're looking at those schedules for our middle schooler and our high school students, and we're noticing that they're really struggling with their math block. Well, what happens in the block right before that math block? Is that potentially setting them up for failure? Are they too stimulated? What might be getting in the way? Things that we can control in that environment. Once we have looked at our I, C, and E, the fourth thing that we look at is the learner. We talk about this in our MTSS Foundations course, that oftentimes we want to start with that learner. We have our universal screener and then we say, oh, this learner has a need. However, it's a lot easier to control those first three components first. So finally, after we've looked at our instruction, our curriculum, and our environment, then we'll start looking at that learner and think about what are the specific skills that this student might be lacking, what motivations are lacking, what barriers are existing that is preventing this student from accessing the material. As we're digging further into our learner, we always like to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, we're working smarter, not harder. So if we're doing a universal screener for a student and we notice that their math scores are incredibly low, we could just stop there and we could say, oh, okay, we need to do some more diagnostic assessing and we need to dig in deeper to figure out what that math need is. However, if you take a step back and look at that whole child approach and you're noticing that that student is never showing up to their math block, you now have two different needs. You could work really hard to build that math intervention, but if that student isn't in the classroom yet, or there's something getting in the way of that student being able to even receive that intervention, all of that work is going to be in vain. So we like to fight the clutter by pausing and analyzing what system is going to work best. It's just like organizing our pantry. If we don't pause to think about that system first and put things back in an order that's going to make sense to us, we're just going to end up in the exact same position later on. Unlike our academic data, our behavior data, our collection tools are often things that we are developing as a district or at a school-based level. It's harder to quantify and qualify human behavior. So that's where I see a lot of this clutter come in as we're trying to assess, what are our behavior needs of our students? So as we're building that universal strategy that many people can use, you're going to make sure that you're committing to taking the time to train others. I know this is where it gets so difficult because we simply don't have that time, but I promise you, if you take that time on the front end to really define what is the specific behavior that we are trying to collect, and we're clearly defining that observable behavior. As you're collecting that data, in order to really be pinpointing that specific need that student is having, I also recommend utilizing a discrete tracking system. It's one of the reasons why I absolutely love the Branching Minds platform. Is gone are the days of our kids carrying around their clipboard with their little tally sheet. If you can try and just be really intentional about using a discrete tracking system like in Branching Minds, you can go ahead and do that diagnostic behavior tracking directly in the platform. That's going to take away a lot of those kind of nuances that are going to lead you into skewed data world and help you really have specific behavior diagnostic data that you can build a strong plan off of.